Welcome everybody to tonight's lecture, and the lecture is Chess Legends. Okay, so normally speaking, I would reach back into the history and find some wonderful games of Botvinnik or Smyslov, and we would learn the legends, learn chess from the legends. Unfortunately, I can't do that in the face of what has happened today. Today was an extraordinary day for America's highest rated player, Hikaru Nakamura. He is playing in a super elite tournament in Zurich, where all the top grandmasters of the world were competing, and he entered the last day of competition 1 point behind Viswanathan, 1 point behind. Today in Zurich, they played 5 games of rapid chess, and Hikaru made up the deficit against Anand, and they tied for first. Because they had tied for first, Anand and Nakamura had to play a Armageddon game. Anand was white in the Armageddon game and had 5 minutes, and Hikaru had black and he had 4 minutes. But Hikaru had draw odds. If he draws the game, he wins the tournament. But Hikaru won the game. And as a result, Hikaru Nakamura won one of the strongest tournaments ever held, and he did that all today. So normally I would take a single game and go through it carefully, and we would understand why this happened and why that happened. But as it's happening, we're actually going to see 6 games. 5 rapid chess games and 1 blitz game. And in the first rapid chess game, so we won't look at the games too in depth, Hikaru is white, Fabiano Caruana. The world's #2 player is black. And Hikaru opened up with the English, and it was a symmetrical English. And when I was young, this exact position used to be my favorite position with white. I did very well with white's position, and I liked it very much. So it is called the symmetrical English, and normally speaking, in the symmetrical English, I would play this move, A2, A3, with the idea of expanding on the queen side. Many of my opponents played A6. I would play Rook B1, Rook B8, B4, takes, takes. And I had this position numerous times as white. My opponents would play the move B5, expecting me to trade pawns and make an even-Steven position. I would play C5. Ooh, that's different. And my idea would be to expand in the center. A lot of my opponents would play A5, and I played bishop A3. They would trade, I would trade, they would trade, I would trade. So we'd get a position like this, and it's not any more symmetrical, is it? It's not a symmetrical position anymore. And I had lots of games like this. That was not Hikaru's choice. What he did instead is he just played the move D2, D3, which was rather a restrained choice. Now we're back to a symmetrical, and now Hikaru plays A2, A3, which is it's kind of funny, because when the pawn was back here on D2, the pawn protected the knight. Now white's not really threatening to move his rook here and advance his pawn, because his knight is undefended. So it's a kind of a strange move to insert this move D2, D3. Black played E6, knight F3, knight E7, rook B1, B7, B6. So in this opening, it's very flexible. The players can both choose from a wide variety of plans. And now with this move, b7, b6, black says, okay, I'll make a double fianchetto. I'll fianchetto both of my bishops. Castles, bishop b7, queen d2. Can somebody explain queen d2 to me? What's that? Young man.
He's trying to protect the knight and the bishop.
Precisely. He protects the knight with his queen in order to be able to advance his b-pawn. Black stops him. Black stops white from advancing his b-pawn, but white does it instead of 2 squares, 1 square. Now white's thinking, I'll fianchetto my bishop too. Castles, bishop b2. And again, the positions kind of even Steven. d7, d5. So black breaks in the center with d7, d5. And Hikaru plays the strange move, knight e1. So what Hikaru's idea is, he wants to open up this bishop. He wants to open up the bishop. And at the same time, he wants to support the advance b3, b4 by bringing his knight to the c2 square. So it's a pretty complex maneuver, but it has a very clear plan. Black jumps into the center with knight d4. Now here I was surprised by Hikaru's choice. He dropped back with his queen to protect this pawn on b3. I'm not a big fan of this move. I think it's okay, but I thought it would be more sensible for white to drop back with his bishop and defend the pawn with his rook. After all, the queen's already developed. And when you moved your queen, when Hikaru moves his queen back, he undevelops his queen. So I thought moving the bishop was superior. But this was Hikaru's choice. Rook b8. So this move, rook b8, simply tries to defend the bishop on b7 so that these pawns on c4 and d5, the pawn on d5 isn't in a pin. Knight a4. So what Hikaru's idea is, he wants to play the move e3 and to trade dark squared bishops. Black stops him with the move e5. Knight c2. Now this is a tricky move. The knight on c2 blocks the defense of the pawn on b3. Caruana could capture the pawn on b3. He didn't. Why? Yes, young man.
Because the bishop could take the e-pawn.
Yeah. So in this position, in fact, bishop c6 was Caruana's choice. So in case of knight takes b3, white could make a discovery against this knight, this knight on b3 by taking the pawn on e5. And it's a trade, but at the end of the trade, there's a weakness on the square. There's a weak pawn on b6, and Caruana didn't want to do that. He played e5. Bishop c6, the knight came to e3, knight goes back to e6. So right now both players are playing a maneuvering game, and things are about to get wild after this move. Whoa. Yeah, wait a minute. Is that a good move? Did Hikaru blunder a piece? He got forked. Look at that. Oh my gosh, how could Hikaru possibly save himself?
Oh, I see.
Yeah? He played knight to d5. Now, Caruana captured the knight, but white has a way of winning back his piece. How could he do it? Yes, young man.
Take the knight.
Yes, that's what he did, and it did it with check. Right? And that's exactly what happened. So at the moment, Hikaru has a bishop for the knight. He has a light squared bishop, But that light squared bishop, as we're about to see, plays a crucial role in the middle game that occurs. As it turns out, and we'll see it in a moment, the light squared bishop on C6, controls the A8 square. And that becomes important, as we'll see. Knight d4, bishop d5. So the bishop pops out to defend the pawn on e3. Just a second. Defending the pawn on e3. And Hikaru says, okay, but is that pawn on e3 good or bad? What do you think? Is it?
It's actually pretty bad because it's almost isolated.
It is kind of isolated, but it's there. It's worrisome because it's close in our camp. Yeah. So it's a little bit of both. It's a potential weakness, but also potential strength. So this is a kind of a tough one, but it's a judgment call that two very fine grandmasters had to make. So bishop g5, bishop c3. So what Hikaru is trying to do is advance on the queen side, and his opponent, Fabi, is trying to advance on the king side. And white advances, and there's a trade. Now notice that the A file just got open, but white could put his rook on the A file, but black cannot put his rook on the A file. That's interesting. Something going on back there. H4, look at him go. He's really putting pressure on white's king side. And white says, no, 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 no. I'm going to keep the king side closed. I'm going to play the move g4 and stop the king side from opening up. Bishop f4. King h1. I found this to be a very interesting move. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask Hikaru himself. I thought Hikaru had planned to play the move h3 and put his king here on g2. He didn't do that. Why do you think not? He did not do that. Yes.
I don't think he doesn't want his bishop hanging on g3 and 2.
Exactly. Maybe Hikaru didn't like the idea of black's bishop coming to f2, and maybe the black queen would come right behind. So that was why, in this position, Hikaru kept his pawn on h2 and just brought his king into the corner. h3, b5. So the position's very, very closed, but both sides have certain things that they're playing for, certain advantages they're playing for. Rook g1. So the idea behind this move, rook g1, was to kind of discourage black from ever thinking in the future that he may play f5, as the rook would be on the g file in anticipation of that break. King g7, bishop e4. Now here, I don't know if Caruana thought that he needed to play this exchange sacrifice, rook a8. What he was probably very afraid of was that white was going to get a very good rook, rook a1, rook a6. Yes, Anand?
Why couldn't he play rook d7 earlier?
Yes, well, in fact, he could do it right now. He could play rook d7, new variation, rook a1, and play his rook over to a7. But then I think he was fearful that white would bring his rook to a6, attacking this pawn on b6, and in case the rooks were traded, that this guy is really scary, that this pawn might go too fast. So Caruana made an interesting decision. I'm not sure it's a good one, but he decided to sacrifice the exchange, and Hikaru captured it. and offered a trade of rooks. And now the rooks come off. This bishop on f4 is an excellent bishop. It really is. But is it worth a rook? That's a hard one. Queen h4, very frightening move. Ooh, black is... Queen f2 is the very big threat. That is correct. Queen f2, and then bingo bongo, checkmate. So white has to be very, very careful. Queen h4, rook f1, stopping the checkmate threat. Queen h8. I'm not sure I know exactly what was on Fabi's mind after that move. Bishop c3, queen a8. Now rook e1. So white is protecting the pawn on e2 so that his queen is not tied to the protection of the pawn. Queen b7, rook back to g1, trades, and queen a1. Ooh. Now, I'm not sure what was going on right here after queen b8, because look at that threat. What does the queen on b8 threaten? Yes, absolutely. So black has a battery on the diagonal, and he just wants to snip off that h2 pawn, and who knows what's going on. Yeah, that could be devastating. Only move, g5, very good. So that the rook on g1 has the square g4. Bishop takes, rook g4. And now if it's white's turn, white could come over with his queen and capture this pawn on h3. So black retreated. White played rook to h4, attacking the pawn. h2. And now the queen. Whoa. So now white's idea is be careful, be on the alert. Queen h3 and rook h7 is in the position for white. So black played queen a8 in order to get a check downstairs. King h1 g2, queen b7, queen e1. What was that? What kind of move was that? I thought to myself. Oh, I see. Look what he's planning. Queen h4. So white was planning to go queen h4, down here to h6 with a check, and then set up for rook e8. So queen h4, the queens were traded, and now it's rook versus bishop and pawn. The funny thing is, it's not a contest. The game is over. White simply wants to play the move f4, and king takes h2, winning a pawn, and eventually his rook will come all the way around the board to a6 to win the game. Caruana played f6, takes, and now Nakamura, Hikaru said, I don't even need to win your h2 pawn. I'm just going to go after your b6 pawn and win the game. Gobble, gobble. And Fabi said, you're right. I resign. Okay, let's see the next game. In the next game, Hikaru is facing one of his many rivals in the world of chess, two-time former world champion Vladimir Kramnik, the man who dethroned Garry Kasparov. And Vladimir is really an exceptionally strong rapid chess player as well as classical chess player. He's one of those players who Garry Kasparov described as a person who knows where the pieces belong. He moves the pieces naturally to their best places. So Hikaru started with a win. He gets white against Vladimir Kramnik, And the play is very common to a Catalan. One difference is white does not have his pawn on d4. This pawn on d2 is normally on the d4 square, but white has delayed the advance of his pawn, and black takes advantage of that by putting his pawn on c5. Okay, a4. So very common, normal motif in these positions is white is trying to create a weakness. White is trying to create a weakness on the b5 pawn, or to provoke black to advance his pawn to b4, and then white gets an outpost on c4 for his pieces. Bishop e7, knight c3, queen b6, queen b3, b4. Mission accomplished. White has forced black to capitulate and to advance his pawn. Why didn't black defend his pawn with the move bishop c6? Wouldn't that have been a good move? Precisely. The problem is, after all of these trades, the bishop is overworked and no longer protects the pawn on b5. So bishop c6 actually would just have blundered a pawn. So b4. a5, kicking black's queen back, and knight comes back to b1. And the knight comes back. So the knight is seeking to recharge itself. It wants to go knight to d2 to c4. And then it'll be a very good knight instead of where it is right now, which is a very bad knight. Bishop attacks queen. Queen drops back. Castles, knight d2. Now white has lost a lot of time with all of these wonderful, wonderful maneuvers, and black has an edge in development, but his knight on d7, that's not such a great knight. And black is going to have to look for ways of improving his pieces. And there you see, right away. So black's idea is he wants to go knight c6 and maybe to capture this pawn. Now white's hoping that black plays knight c6. Why is knight c6 a bad move? What could possibly be wrong with this move? Yes, exactly. e2, e4, oopsie daisy, traps the bishop in the middle of the board. Vladimir Kramnik is too clever for that. He decided to bring his rook into the game. Rook a8, a7, e4. See how the bishop moved back? And the rook developed rook c7. Bishop e3. Oops. The knight came back to d7. Why didn't Vladimir play knight to c6? What's wrong with that? You take the pawn. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid that this Aren't you afraid that this rook and queen are lined up against each other? No? Okay, very good. I just testing. So knight d7, very good move, defending the pawn, queen. And now, again, it's like one of the things I really notice about Hikaru is he's doing a very good job in outmaneuvering a lot of his opponents. Vladimir Kramnik is a very, very hard player to outmaneuver, but at the moment, over the last 5-10 moves, white has improved his pieces a lot, and black not so much. Rook c8, e5, expanding in the center. Knight d5, bishop d2. So black's moving his knight back and forth a lot, isn't he? h4. Now, in this position, who would have played h4? I don't think I would have. I'm not sure what I would have done, but it wouldn't have been my first choice. I might have thought, for example, about a move like bishop to e4. The idea here is just to improve the scope of the bishop a little bit. Maybe I would play for queen h5. I might have considered f4. The idea behind this move is that this knight on d5 is defended by this pawn on e6, so the idea of f4, f5 to undermine the knight. So I might have thought about those moves long before I thought about h4. But h4 has some very nice things going for it. In the first place, you kind of give your king a little bit of luft, and in the second, you're hoping that you will weaken black's king with h4 and h5. So, see these moves, knight c6, queen came out to g4. The idea behind this move is pay attention. There might be a bishop h6 plan in the position. He paid attention. He moved his king. Bishop out to g5. So what white was thinking is that maybe his dark squared bishop, the bishop on d2, really wasn't that good. And if on a good day, maybe this knight could jump to the square d6. But to be able to get away with that maneuver, the dark square bishops would have to be traded. So Hikaru was looking ahead on that one. Rook c7, bishop e4, h6, bishop back to d2. Sometimes it's very hard to guess Hikaru's moves. I thought his intention was to trade bishops. I was wrong. f5. You bet he did. f5. f5, that's a nasty fork of the queen and the bishop. He did en passant. Knight takes. Okay, also still a fork of queen and bishop. Queen takes pawn. That was a greedy grab. I'm in admiration. Takes the... now, can we take with the pawn?
No.
How come? It's legal. It's in the rules of chess. You could take with the pawn. Yes, that is correct. Pawn takes would not be a good move because the knight on c4 is unprotected and your move, rook f6, is a winner. It drives the queen, oops, excuse me, it drives the queen away from the c4 knight. Knight on c4 loses protection, the knight is lost. So that was why Hikaru recaptured with his queen. Bishop f6. But now, black has a very good dark square bishop, and some of the squares around his king, well, they're a little weak. So Hikaru has to be careful that he doesn't fall victim to a counterattack on the king side. Bishop e3, rook there, queen here. I wasn't 100% sure about this move, queen to g4. I thought that Hikaru's plan had been to drop back with his queen to g2, keeping this diagonal, keeping his queen on this diagonal, and looking to, and looking to grab this pawn on c5 with either the bishop or even with the knight. But Hikaru played queen g4, and bang! Bishop takes b2. Ooh, that was a big surprise. Whoa. So Hikaru played rook b1. Why didn't Hikaru capture? Don't answer all at once. Why didn't Hikaru recapture? Yeah, knight knight e5. You were thinking that one? And what about queen e4? Bishop c6, as well as knight f3, check. It's a discoverer against the queen. It was this move knight e5. Maybe if white had put his queen on g2, this would not have been possible. After bishop b2, rook b1, the bishop came back to d4, and black at this moment had won his pawn back. Well, indeed, at this moment there was a trade. Queen e8. Whoa. Now, yeah, what's wrong? He played in the game queen h3, but why didn't he play bishop to d6? So the rook is being attacked, so the rook should move. Where to move the rook? Rook e4. And white and black gets out with a tempo. Yes, exactly. Black gets out with a tempo. With a tempo against the queen. So Hikaru played the move queen h3 with the threat of bishop d6. Rook e2. So remember all of those moves that Hikaru made with his queen? It kind of seemed to go circling around. He finally got his queen back on g2 after all of that time. Yes. Queen to g6, queen f3, rook e4. So at this moment, Hikaru stands poorly, and he would be very happy at this moment to end up with a draw, but Vladimir is now playing for a win. Bishop d6. That's a tricky move. Black's queen has to keep the rook on e4 protected. Rook e8, bishop takes. Now, do we understand that move? Why didn't he? Okay, why? Check. I'll take it. You just take the rook. So it was just a one-move blunder. Hikaru must have been under time trouble, because he could have certainly played, for example, a move like c5, supporting his bishop. Now, black stands better, but boy, that was a big blunder of the bishop. And after takes, black is just a piece up, and won very quickly and resigns. So, okay, so at this moment, Hikaru was not happy. He had just lost, and he is like, okay, he's a point behind Anand, and that loss really hurt his chances of playing for first prize in the tournament. Now, he plays against Sergey Karjakin. Sergey plays e4. It's a French defense, a French Tarrasch. These moves, this is a very, very mainline topical line in the Tarrasch. All of these moves have been seen before. And this was a little bit of a strange move for me, h2, h3. I'm more familiar with bringing the bishop out right away, and if the queen moves, to put the bishop on this nice square e5. I think white has the advantage here. I prefer white's position. h3, rook d8, and rook e2. I'm not sure that this idea of rook e2 is so good. I would have put the bishop on e5. I would have gone with the old standard. Okay, knight d5. So white offers black offers white an opportunity to capture a pawn, to take on d5 and to take. Well, there's a rook on e2 defending the v2. Oops. Don't be so sure. So now again, Hikaru is offering his d5 pawn as a kind of a bait, and he took the bait. But look what happened in the resulting position. Bishops of opposite color. Even though white's a pawn up, he won't be able to break black's fortress. The bishop blockades the pawn, and then black just brings his king up the board. And in fact, offered a draw, because neither player, that bishop on d5 just can't be budged, and then the extra pawn can't be utilized. So at this moment, with only 2 games to go, Hikaru has made 50%. Okay. And now he faces his rival, 5-time world champion Viswanathan Anand. And if he has any chance, sorry? Yes. And if Hikaru is going to have any chance of winning the tournament, this is a must-win game. And we get this position, this opening, b5. Wow. Yeah, look at that. Well, black, I admire Vichy. He just grabbed the pawn. Okay, the pawns may be doubled and a little bit goofy looking, but it's an extra pawn. He grabbed it. Now, a4. Okay, so the idea here is white is trying to create a weakness on b5, but also his bishop is an ambush. So he's hoping to open up that diagonal one day. So bishop b7, b3. And this was a very clever move. I thought this was a very good move by Vichy. Vichy said, okay, you can have your pawn back. Go ahead and take the pawn, but as a result, black now has a protected pass pawn. So long term, way down the road, if you get into some kind of an ending, this will be a big advantage for black. But Hikaru said, okay, the position's very imbalanced now. You have a queenside majority, I have a majority in the center. I need to win the game. I'll take a lot of strategic risks. Here we go. And the knight on b3 is simply excellent. It's a great blockader, and it attacks the pawn on c5. Okay, so a5, bishop e2, and the players reached a position like this. And I think at this moment, Anand thought his position was fine, and it probably is. But after the move e4, white is expanding. White is using his majority, and the moment black cannot use his majority. Takes c5. Knight goes back to e8, and bishop takes. So white pass pawn on c5, that's an annoying pawn. Really annoying. Knight e5, f4, knight c6, bishop b2, knight f6. And I like this maneuver that Hikaru plays. This move, knight e2. Why did he play knight d2? Yes. So that he could move either to c4 in d6, or maybe even to e4 in d6. If you move to c4, you just got to be careful that your knight doesn't get pinned. But putting that knight on d6 would be so sweet, right? That's like a fantastic outpost. So black messed white up. Black played knight c3. He didn't take. He took it now. And so black deliberately sacrificed a pawn because he thought that he has enough pressure and he was going to win it back. Just a second. Let's see, here, here, here. So this is a kind of a crazy position right here. Why didn't, I couldn't figure this out. Why didn't Vichy just take that pawn? Wouldn't that have been a good move? Why not? Why not? That's just a, snap that pawn right off. Knight to c4. I think black has the chance to capture. So I think black has the chance to capture. But white actually has a really cool move. He could go rook here, doubling the rooks. It's not over, queen here. And there's a threat of discover check. So what could white do? I actually saw queen f3, but I think it's the same concept, that you block and suddenly black is pinned along the c file. That's a very nasty pin, as well as along the diagonal. So that was why Vichy didn't take the pawn. Instead, Vichy played here, here, and he sacrificed his queen for this situation. He gave up his queen for a rook and bishop, but he's got a solid position. And Nakamura is going to have trouble breaking down black's fortress. Knight f3, and I don't like this move that Vichy played, knight b7. In fact, it's a kind of a funny situation, but if I could ask the audience, what would be the perfect square for black's knight? Young man. Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. That these squares, d5 and f5, are the perfect outpost for black's knight. When black played the move knight d8 to b7, he's getting further away from his best squares. So I thought that Hikaru would have a hard time winning the position if Vichy had played, for example, h7, h6, just making luft. Let's just make a move for white for a moment, h2, h4, and now knight c6. If the rooks are traded, I thought that it was vital that this knight get to this square. Or, oops, excuse me, or, yes, cancel, or to either f5, sorry, or d5. And it's still a lot of hard work here. Black has good squares for his pieces. So I was a little bit surprised by this move, knight b7. And I thought that was a step in the wrong direction. At the moment, the knight looks good on c5, but as we'll see, it turned out not to be so good on the d7 square. Knight dropped back to f8, h5, and now, how is the knight going to get to f5? It can't. It's like it's stuck. And in the meanwhile, white may, very, very slowly, it might take him some time, but with preparation, he's just going to slowly advance his pawns, and he'll be playing queen against rook and a bishop, and white should be able to overcome Vichy. Finally, f5. We get this position, takes, rook d7. Ooh, so rook d7, and white's threatening queen takes f7 and check and mate. So rook takes, queen takes, knight, queen here. Now you've got to defend the knight because the knight protects the rook, and so bishop c5 was forced. And now, what did white do? E6, bravo. That's exactly what he did. Opening up the E5 square for his knight. Ooh. Now in this position, besides queen F7 check and queen takes E6, white is also threatening knight to D7. And all of black's pieces collapse. Yeah, knight D7 is a real nasty, nasty threat. Queen C6, check. Ooh. I mean, with one move, the queen hits every one of black's pieces, the rook on F8 and the bishop on D4. Woo! So this victory allowed Hikaru for the first time to catch up to Vichy in the tournament, and there's one game to go, and he was black, so he had to make a draw. Vichy had a chance to win. They both made a draw. Let's see how Hikaru made a draw. So Queen's Gambit declined. Magnus did not play in this event. He was replaced by Vichy Anand. And so this is the Lasker variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. And Levon, Aronian, the white player, is acknowledged to be one of the world's foremost experts in this position as white. And so Hikaru was really going up against the best of the best in choosing this defense. And Hikaru played it superbly. It's considered that white's a little bit better, that his pieces are a bit more active, and also that black's queenside pieces haven't developed. So white is considered to have an advantage, but let's see how Hikaru handles the defense. So far, he's done a very good job of just swapping off and trading off some pieces. This move, Queen E7, prepares the move Rook D8. And his king is nice and at least safe. Notice the king on G7, virtually untouchable on the dark squares. And now Rook E7, Queen. And interesting how black started to move all of his pawns to dark squares on the queen side, right? Clearing the diagonal. So Queen E5. And after the trades, now we're getting closer and closer to a draw. And I thought this was kind of funny that Levon Aronian brought his king all the way over to the queen side. And when they got to this position, the players agreed to a draw. So now the table is set. The two players are tied for first, and they go into Armageddon. So in an Armageddon game, they usually do a drawing of lots. And the player who plays the white pieces, he gets 5 minutes on his clock for all of his moves. There's no increments. The player who plays black gets 4 minutes, so he's a minute behind. But the player with the black pieces has draw odds. A draw, and black wins the event. So white, if you play white in an Armageddon game, you gotta win. That's the only way. You gotta win. Okay, so the opening was once again a Queen's Gambit declined, and earlier in the tournament, in the classical portion of the tournament, both players, whoops, okay. Yeah. Both players had played this exact position, as you can see. So the players had reached this exact position earlier in the tournament, and Hikaru had lost to Vichy. And that game had continued just as the same way that this game had. So up to this moment, they're following their earlier game in the tournament, and Vichy played this move, bishop e5. And that was not what he had played last time around. If I remember right, he had actually played b4, and the game had gone like this. And essentially, the difference is that Vichy had allowed his bishop to get traded on the f4 square. So I'm not sure why, but for this game, Vichy had this move prepared, bishop e5, a slight difference from the earlier game. c7, c6, g2, g4. Wow, that is really a sharp move. How many of you would have played that move? Really? You like that? You like that? You know, I'm not so sure. That move is a real challenge because essentially if the attack misses, you're making a lot of weaknesses on the king side. Also, when you make the move g2, g4, you've got to ask yourself a question. Where do I want to put my king? Yeah? It's always a good question to ask, especially in a game of chess. Where do I want to put my king? Probably white does not want to put his king over on the queen side because black could easily open up the queen side. Do you want to leave your king in the center? Normally it's not a good idea, but when you play the move g2, g4, it's kind of like saying I'm not wanting to put my king on the king side either. So this was a very risky strategic move by Anand. Knight dropped back, rook came over. Finally, it was time to take that bishop, and now knight to d7, offering to trade knights. We can see in this situation that basically what white wants to do is he wants to make a pawn storm. He wants to go h4, g5, h5, g6, and he wants to go after black's king. One of the best ways of meeting a pawn storm is to get out of the way. That's it. That's how do I face a pawn storm? Get out of the way. Think of an avalanche or an avalanche. Snow's coming down the mountain. Do you want to be down there where the snow's going to hit? You want to get out of the way. Same with the pawn storm. So with this move, knight d7, Hikaru plays it very well. He gets his knight out of the way so that white won't be able to advance his pawns with tempo. Knight takes, bishop takes. Whoa! That's a very risky move. f2, f4. Essentially, Anand is saying, I don't mind. Go ahead and give me a check. I'll move my king. And then maybe Anand is thinking that he'll try to lure the bishop to h4 so that in the future, after the bishop gets to h4, maybe he could go g5 and trap the bishop. That's pretty sophisticated. Hikaru said, I trust you. I'm not going to give you a check. I'll blast open the queen side with the move b6, and I'll keep that check in reserve. b4, a5. And now Vichy opens up the queen side. Pardon me, Hikaru opens up the queen side with trades. Queen comes over. Okay, so what's the idea of the queen coming over? Black wants to trade on c5 and go queen b2. Uh-oh. Ruh-roh. Then black is breaking through. g5 takes, queen b4. Uh-oh. White's king is getting into trouble now because of this absolute pin against this knight on c3. Oh dear. Now, you guys take over. Hold on, let me get rid of the Let me get rid of the...
Rook A3.
Well, whenever you've pinned your opponent's pieces, or pinned a piece, the rule of thumb is to put pressure on the pinned piece. So this move, Rook A3, should come very naturally to you. Or as Reuben Fine would say, as natural as a baby's smile. Rook A3, Queen D2. Now what should black play?